The restaurant was glowing with golden lights and soft music filled the air. But inside Emma's chest everything felt cold and heavy because tonight her husband Daniel had asked her to come for dinner, and she had thought maybe he wanted to make peace after weeks of arguments, but she was wrong. Terribly wrong, because sitting beside him was another woman wearing a red dress and a smile that looked like a challenge. Daniel looked at Emma with that smirk he always used when he wanted to hurt her without raising his voice, and he said in front of everyone, "Maybe if you dressed like her, you would look like someone's wife and not their maid." The words sliced through her heart like sharp glass, and the laughter that followed was even worse, because it came from him and from the woman beside him. Emma sat still, trying to hold her tears. She could hear whispers from other tables, people pretending not to stare, but watching everything. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of water. She could not even swallow it because her throat felt dry. She wished she could disappear, but she stayed because walking out would give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The woman in red leaned close to Daniel, whispering something, and then laughed again. Her voice was loud and fake, and Daniel loved it. He looked at Emma and said, "See, Veronica actually knows how to have fun. You should learn from her." Emma forced a small smile. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made him crueler, so she said nothing. In her mind, she remembered how things used to be when Daniel had been kind and loving, when he had told her she was the best thing in his life. But that was before the money, before the new friends, before he decided she was no longer good enough for his fancy world. He had changed, and so had she, but he could not see it yet. The waiter came with another bottle of wine. Daniel bragged about his business deals, about how smart he was and how people respected him. He did not notice that most people were rolling their eyes at his arrogance. Emma listened quietly. She knew this man too well. She knew his pride, his fear, his weakness. He needed people to believe he was powerful. Daniel turned to Veronica and said, "Baby, I told you Emma is a nice woman, but she just does not fit in with us anymore." And Veronica smiled sweetly, pretending to feel sorry for Emma while holding Daniel's arm. Emma's stomach twisted in pain, but she kept her eyes down, focusing on the candle flickering in front of her, trying to keep her heart steady. Then the restaurant doors opened and a hush fell over the room. Someone important had just entered. People began to whisper and turn their heads. Emma looked up slowly and saw a tall man in a dark suit walking in with calm authority. His presence filled the place instantly. The waiters straightened up. The manager rushed to greet him. It was Alexander Cole, the man everyone called the King of Wall Street. Daniel's eyes widened for a moment, and then he whispered to Veronica, "That's Alexander Cole. He owns half of this city." Emma had heard of him too. She had read about his success, his power. His story was everywhere. But what Daniel did not know was that Alexander was not just a famous name to her. He was a part of her past, a part she had never told anyone, not even her husband. Emma lowered her gaze quickly, hoping he would not notice her. She wanted the evening to end without more embarrassment, but fate had other plans. Alexander's sharp eyes scanned the room and then suddenly stopped on her. His expression changed slightly from cold distance to surprise. He took a step forward, and the sound of his footsteps echoed across the restaurant. Daniel noticed it too and sat up straighter, pretending to look relaxed as Alexander approached their table. People began whispering louder now, wondering why the billionaire was walking toward them. Daniel smiled nervously, ready to shake his hand, but Alexander did not look at him. He looked directly at Emma. Emma felt her heart race. She tried to breathe but could not. She had not seen him in years, since that one day that had changed her life forever. Alexander's deep voice cut through the tension as he said softly, "Emma, is that you?" Daniel froze, his hand still in the air. His eyes darted between his wife and the most powerful man in the room. He stuttered, "Wait, you two know each other." The whole restaurant fell silent, waiting for her answer. Emma lifted, her head slowly meeting Alexander's gaze with calm eyes that hid 1,000 memories. "Yes," she said gently. "We know each other." Daniel laughed awkwardly, trying to hide his confusion. "Oh, come on. How do you know Alexander Cole?" He looked at Alexander, as if begging for some kind of explanation. Alexander's face remained serious, his eyes never leaving Emma, as he said she once helped me when no one else would. The room gasped. People whispered again. Even the waiter holding a tray paused to listen. Daniel's jaw dropped. What do you mean? Helped you? Alexander smiled slightly, but there was something sharp behind it. You will find out soon, he said, and then looked back at Emma, his voice softening. You have not changed at all. Emma. Emma smiled politely, but inside her heart trembled with emotions she had buried for years. The humiliation from earlier faded away, replaced by a strange mix of fear and power. She could feel every eye on her, including Daniel's, but for the first time she was not the one being looked down on. She was the mystery everyone wanted to understand. And as the music started again and whispers filled the air, Daniel realized the night had just turned against him, and he had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The air inside the restaurant felt heavy after Alexander Cole spoke. Everyone had gone silent. Even the soft music in the background could not cover the whispers spreading from table to table. People looked from Emma to Alexander and then to Daniel, trying to understand what was happening. Because it was not every day that the King of Wall Street stopped in the middle of his dinner to talk to someone. Ordinary Daniel forced a nervous laugh, pretending to be calm, but his voice cracked slightly as he said, "Oh, so you two really know each other? That is interesting. I had no idea." And he looked at Emma, waiting for her to explain, but Emma said nothing. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she could barely hear her own thoughts. She had never expected to meet Alexander again, especially not like this. Alexander's sharp eyes stayed on her. He ignored Daniel completely, as if he did not even exist, and when he finally spoke again, his tone was calm but strong, and every person nearby could feel the authority in his voice. He said, "You saved me once, Emma, and I never got to thank you." Daniel blinked, trying to understand what he was hearing. "What do you mean, saved you?" he asked, his voice now sounding smaller. Alexander turned his head slowly, to look at Daniel for the first time, his eyes cold and distant. "I mean exactly what I said," he replied. "She saved me and my company from falling apart when everyone else turned their backs." Daniel laughed weakly, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Emma, she is just a housewife," he said. "She does not even work anymore." Alexander's expression did not change. He simply raised an eyebrow and said, "That is your mistake, Mr. Lewis. You think being quiet means being weak, but sometimes silence hides the strongest minds." Daniel's smile faded a little. He looked at Emma again, but she still said nothing. She only watched the scene unfold with calm eyes, though inside she was trembling because she remembered everything. 5 years ago she had worked as a junior analyst at one of Alexander's companies. She had found a huge mistake in their reports, one that could have destroyed their entire business. She had gone directly to Alexander and told him what she found, even though she was just a small employee. When everyone else stayed quiet out of fear, she had spoken the truth. He had fixed it and later told her that he would never forget her courage. But Emma had left the company soon after to support Daniel's dreams instead. Now standing before him again, she could feel the weight of that old memory pressing against her heart. Daniel, on the other hand, could only stare, his pride cracking, as he began to understand that maybe he had never truly known his wife. Alexander looked at Emma and said, "You look different, stronger. I hope life has been kind to you." Emma smiled faintly. "It has taught me a lot," she replied, her voice soft but steady. The restaurant staff were frozen in place. Waiters stood still, holding trays. Managers whispered into each other's ears. And even Veronica, Daniel's mistress, sat wide-eyed, pretending to check her phone, but unable to stop watching. Daniel tried to regain control of the moment. He reached for his wine glass and said, "Well, that was a long time ago. I'm sure it was not such a big deal anyway." Alexander's gaze turned colder. He placed his hand on the table, leaned slightly forward, and said it was a very big deal. "You see, Mr. Lewis, without your wife, I would have lost everything." Daniel felt sweat forming on his forehead, his throat dry as he forced another laugh. "Oh, well, she has always been good with numbers," he muttered, hoping to make it sound light. But Alexander was not done. He said, "You are lucky, Mr. Lewis, because some people spend their entire lives searching for someone like Emma, someone who is loyal, brave, and honest, and yet you treat her like she is nothing. Daniel's face turned red from embarrassment and anger. He could feel everyone in the restaurant judging him, whispering. Behind their hands, Emma watched quietly. She did not gloat. She did not speak. But her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Veronica shifted uncomfortably beside Daniel, realizing that this dinner had turned into something she did not want to be part of. She whispered, "Maybe we should go." Daniel ignored her, but his eyes flicked nervously between Emma and Alexander. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. Alexander straightened up and said, "Emma, it has been a long time since we worked together. I have been looking for someone with your mind, someone I can trust again. Would you come by my office tomorrow? I have an opportunity for you." Emma's lips parted slightly. She was surprised, but she could see he meant it. His tone was not casual. It was an invitation wrapped in respect. Daniel immediately interrupted. "Wait. Hold on. She does not need a job. She is fine at home." Alexander looked at him with quiet authority and said maybe she should decide that for herself. Daniel clenched his fists under the table, trying not to show his anger, but everyone could see the frustration in his eyes. Emma looked at Alexander and said softly, "I will think about it." Alexander nodded, then gave her a small, reassuring smile, the kind that said he remembered who she was and what she had done. He then turned and walked away, his presence still heavy in the air long after he left the doors behind him closed. But the silence remained. Daniel sat back speechless. Veronica stood up and whispered something about needing to go to the restroom and never came back. Emma finally took a deep breath, her hand still shaking slightly as she looked at her husband. Across the table, he avoided her eyes, pretending to read the menu again, though the food had long been forgotten. And in that quiet moment, Emma realized something deep inside her had changed forever. The night after the dinner, Emma sat alone by the window of her apartment, the city lights glowing softly outside while Daniel paced across the room, his voice filled with anger and disbelief. He could not stop talking about what had happened, how Alexander Cole had humiliated him in front of everyone, how people would talk about it for days, he said. "Emma, do you understand what you did? You embarrassed me. You made me look small." Emma did not answer, her eyes fixed on the lights of the skyscrapers outside. She felt tired, not just from the dinner, but from years of pretending that everything was fine. Daniel kept speaking louder, saying that Alexander had no right to talk to him like that, and that Emma should have defended him. But she only whispered quietly, "I did nothing wrong, Daniel, and you know it." He stopped for a moment, glaring at her with cold eyes. "You think you are special now just because that man noticed you?" he asked, his voice dripping with jealousy. Emma turned her face toward him, her tone calm. "And even I do not think I am special. I just think you forgot who I am." He laughed without joy and walked away, slamming the bedroom door behind him. Emma stayed by the window, listening to the muffled city noise, her heart heavy but also strangely free for the first time in years. She was not afraid of his words. She remembered how Alexander had looked at her not with pity, but with respect, something she had not felt in a very long time. As she sat there, memories from 5 years ago began to return one by one. The small office, where she had worked, the smell of paper and coffee, the long nights checking endless financial reports while everyone else went home. She had been young and quiet, but she had seen something no one else had seen. A mistake, a lie hidden in the numbers, that could have destroyed everything. At first, no one believed her. They said she was wrong, just a junior employee who did not understand the system. But Emma knew she was right. So she went directly to Alexander Cole himself. She remembered standing outside his big office, her hands shaking, her voice trembling as she told his secretary that she needed to speak to him. He had been surprised when she entered his office, a simple girl holding a file of papers. But when she explained what she found, his eyes grew serious. He had asked her to show him everything, and she had done it, her calm voice steady even though her heart was racing. And when he checked the data himself, he realized she was right. She had uncovered a massive error that would have cost his company millions. Alexander had looked at her in silence for a long time before saying, "You just saved my business, and you do not even realize it." After that day, everything changed. He had offered her a promotion, but she refused politely, saying she was planning to get married soon. She wanted a quiet life with Daniel. She remembered how Alexander had smiled then, and told her, "If you ever need anything, come find me." Emma had thanked him and walked away, never thinking she would see him again until that night at the restaurant. Now sitting in her apartment, she wondered if fate was giving her a second chance. Maybe life was trying to tell her something. Daniel had once been her dream, the man she believed would protect her, but he had turned into a stranger who cared only about money and image. And now the man she had once helped, the man she respected, stood as a reminder of what she used to be: brave, clever, and strong. The next morning, Daniel left early, slamming the door behind him again without saying goodbye. Emma made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table thinking about Alexander's words from the night before. His voice had been calm, but full of meaning. "You have a mind I can trust," he had said, and those words echoed in her head again and again. She picked up her phone and stared at the blank screen, debating whether to call his office or not. Finally, she typed a short message saying, "Thank you for last night. I appreciate your kindness," and then hesitated for a long time before pressing send. She almost deleted it, but something inside her pushed her to do it. She pressed the button and set the phone down, her hands trembling. Within minutes, a reply came. It was from Alexander. He wrote, "Come by tomorrow at noon. We have much to discuss." Her heart skipped a beat. She read the message twice to make sure it was real. She felt nervous and curious. At the same time, she could almost hear Daniel's angry voice in her head telling her not to go. But another voice, louder this time, told her to listen to herself. She decided she would go, not because of Alexander, but because she needed to remember who she really was. That night, Daniel returned home late, smelling of alcohol. His words slurred. He asked her what she was smiling about, and she said nothing, just thinking about the future. He laughed harshly, saying, "Your future is right here with me." Emma said nothing more because she knew the truth. His version of her future was small, but hers was growing larger with every breath. As the clock struck midnight, she looked out the window again at the tall buildings glowing against the dark sky. Somewhere up there was Alexander Cole's office, a world far away from her pain. Yet somehow, calling her closer, she whispered softly to herself, "Tomorrow everything will change." The morning sky was gray and calm when Emma stepped out of her apartment, her heart beating fast under her coat. She had not told Daniel where she was going because she knew he would try to stop her. The taxi ride felt endless, the city flashing past her window, tall buildings, glass towers, busy streets. It all looked different today, as if the whole world was watching her take her first step towards something new. When she arrived at the headquarters of Cole Financial Group, the tall glass building seemed to touch the clouds. People in suits moved quickly through the lobby, their faces focused and serious. Emma stood there for a moment, holding her small purse tightly, then walked toward the reception desk. The young woman behind it smiled politely and asked, "May I help you?" Emma took a deep breath and said, "I have an appointment with Mr. Cole." The receptionist checked her computer, nodded and said, "Yes, Ms. Emma Lewis, he is expecting you. Please go to the top floor." Emma thanked her and stepped into the elevator, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed the button for the highest floor. The soft music played as the numbers climbed higher and higher, and she could feel her heart doing the same. She had not been in a corporate office for years, and yet it felt strangely familiar. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a wide hallway filled with light and silence. A woman in a black suit greeted her and led her to a large glass office at the end. Alexander Cole was standing by the window talking on the phone, his tall figure framed by the skyline. When he turned and saw her, he smiled warmly, the kind of smile that carried respect and something deeper. "Emma," he said, walking forward, "thank you for coming." She nodded politely, unsure of what to say. Alexander motioned for her to sit and offered her coffee. He said, I thought about what happened last night and I could not stop thinking about how you handled it with grace. Not many people would stay calm under such humiliation. She looked down and said softly, I am used to staying quiet. It is easier that way. He shook his head gently and said, It might be easier, but it is not better. You have strength. You just forgot to use it. Emma looked at him, her eyes full of questions. Why me? She asked. Why are you offering me this chance? He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful, because he said, I still remember the young woman who walked into my office 5 years ago with courage in her eyes and honesty in her voice. I trust people like that, and I do not forget them. He told her that his company was growing fast, and he needed someone who could see the truth in numbers, someone loyal and fearless. He said, I know what you can do, Emma, and I want you to join my team again, this time not as an analyst but as a financial strategist. The position came with power and respect, and a salary that could change her life. Emma sat still for a moment, unable to speak. She had not worked in years. She had lost her confidence piece by piece, living in Daniel's shadow. But now someone believed in her again. She looked out the window at the city below. Everything seemed so far away, yet so close. She finally said, I do not know if I am ready. Alexander smiled softly. You are more ready than you think, he said. They talked for hours about the company, about her ideas, about the mistakes she had seen in the world of business and how she would fix them. He listened to every word she said, taking notes, asking questions, treating her opinion like it mattered. And for the first time in years, Emma felt alive. She felt like herself again. When she finally left the office that afternoon, she stood outside the building, breathing in the cool air. Her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She felt the world opening before her, a new path forming under her feet. She did not notice the dark car parked across the street. Daniel was inside, watching her through the window, his face pale and his jaw tight. He had followed her after finding the message on her phone, and now he knew exactly where she had gone. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his thoughts burning with jealousy and anger. How dare she meet another man behind his back? He told himself, ignoring the truth, that he was the one who had pushed her away. He waited until she got into a taxi, then drove off in the other direction, his mind already planning what he would say when she got home. That evening, Emma returned to their apartment, tired but happy. Daniel was sitting on the couch pretending to watch television. She walked past him quietly, heading to the bedroom, but he called out, Where were you? She stopped and said, I went to meet Mr. Cole. He offered me a job. Daniel laughed sharply. A job? Are you joking? You do not need to work. Emma turned to him, calm but firm. Maybe I do need to work. Maybe I need to remember who I am. Daniel stood up, his face red with anger. He said, I forbid you to go there again. She met his eyes and said, Then you can forbid me all you want, but I am going anyway. For the first time, Daniel saw something in her that he had not seen in years, a fire, a quiet strength that scared him. He tried to shout, but the words would not come. Emma turned and walked to the bedroom, closing the door behind her heart racing. She leaned against the door and smiled faintly through tears. She knew that tomorrow would be difficult, but she also knew there was no turning back. The woman who had once stayed silent was gone, and a new Emma was about to rise, stronger than ever before. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the city, casting golden light across the tall glass buildings. Emma stood before the mirror, wearing a simple white blouse and gray skirt. Her hair neatly tied back, she looked at her reflection for a long moment, not out of vanity but out of disbelief. She was finally going back to work after so many years. Her heart beat fast with nervous excitement. She picked up her small bag, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the apartment. Daniel sat on the couch, still in his robe, his face hard with anger. He said coldly, I thought I told you not to go. Emma paused at the door, her voice calm and clear. You did, but I am going anyway. And then she walked out without looking back. Daniel stared at her, stunned by her courage. His pride stung more deeply than ever. When Emma arrived at Cole Financial Group, Alexander himself greeted her in the lobby, his smile warm and proud. Welcome to the team. He said the words felt like sunlight after a storm. He led her to her new office, a bright space with large windows overlooking the city. She could hardly believe it. This was real. She was back where she belonged as the days passed. Emma began to shine. Her natural talent and calm confidence returned. She worked long hours studying numbers, finding mistakes, solving problems. Her reports were clear, her ideas bold. Alexander watched her closely, not as a boss, but as someone who truly respected her. He often said, "Emma, you have the mind of a leader. One day you will run your own company." Soon everyone in the office began to notice her too. Whispers spread about the woman who had impressed Alexander Cole himself. She became a quiet legend among the staff. The woman who had come from nowhere and turned everything around. Meanwhile, Daniel's life began to crumble without her support. He struggled at work. His deals went wrong. His colleagues avoided him. He had always thought Emma needed him, but now he saw it was the other way around at night. He sat alone in their silent apartment, surrounded by empty bottles, and guilt but pride kept him from apologizing. One evening, Emma stayed late at the office, the city lights glittering outside her window. Alexander knocked softly on her door. "May I come in?" he asked. She smiled yes, of course. He stepped inside holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, placing one on her desk. "You have been working too hard." Emma smiled again. "Thank you," she said. "I am just trying to do my best." Alexander looked at her and said, "Your best is already changing this company." Do you know that she blushed slightly, not used to praise, but his voice was kind and sincere. They talked for a long time about business, about life, about choices and mistakes. At one point he said softly, "I always knew you were meant for more." The next morning, a photo appeared on a business news website. It showed Emma and Alexander leaving the building together, smiling. The headline said, "Wall Street's King and His New Queen of Finance." The story spread fast. Everyone was talking about it. Daniel saw it while drinking coffee. His hands shook with rage. He slammed the cup on the table, spilling it across the floor. He shouted, "She is humiliating me again." He drove straight to Emma's office, demanding to see her, but the security guard stopped him. He shouted, "My wife works here." The guard called up to the receptionist, but the answer came back cold. "We cannot let him in. Mr. Cole's orders." Daniel stood there, speechless, realizing that even here he no longer had control. Stairs. Emma was in a meeting with investors. When her phone buzzed, she saw Daniel's name flashing on the screen, but she did not answer. She continued speaking with calm authority, explaining her strategy and earning applause. When the meeting ended, Alexander approached and said, "You handled that perfectly." Emma smiled quietly. "It feels good to be heard again." That evening, she went home to pack her things. She had made her decision. She could not live with Daniel any longer. When he came home later, his face red and tired, she told him softly, "I am leaving." Daniel stared at her as if he had not heard her. "Right, you cannot just leave me," he said, his voice shaking. Emma looked at him sadly. "I am not leaving you, Daniel. I am leaving the person you became." He begged at first, saying he would change, but Emma only shook her head. "You had years to change," she said, "but now it is too late." She took her bag and walked out, her heart heavy but free. For the first time in a long time, she did not cry. She did not look back. She simply walked toward her new life. Weeks passed and Emma's name began appearing in newspapers and magazines. She was called the woman who turned numbers into gold. She spoke at events, advised investors, and became a symbol of grace and intelligence everywhere she went. People admired her story. The woman who had been mocked now stood above those who once looked down on her. Daniel watched from afar, his pride shattered. His world empty. He tried to call her once, but she never answered, and deep inside he knew why he had broken something that could never be fixed. On a bright Friday morning, Alexander called Emma into his office. He said, "There is one more position. I want you to take Chief Financial Officer of the entire company." She gasped, unable to speak, her eyes filled with tears of joy. She nodded slowly and said, "Thank you for believing in me." Alexander smiled and said, "No, Emma, thank you for reminding me what real strength looks like." And as she stood by the window looking out at the skyline, she realized she was no longer the woman who had been humiliated in a restaurant. She was Emma Lewis, the woman who rose from pain to power, and her story was only just beginning. The night was bright with city lights, and the air carried the soft sound of music and laughter inside the grand ballroom of the Empire Hotel, where a charity gala was being held. Reporters, cameras, and guests filled the room dressed in glitter and pride. It was one of the biggest events of the year, and every important name in finance and business was there, but the center of attention was not Alexander Cole. It was Emma Lewis. She walked into the ballroom wearing a long silver gown, her head high, her smile calm and confident. Everyone turned to look, her presence shining brighter than the chandeliers. The woman who once sat in silence at a dinner table now moved through crowds that whispered her name with respect. Alexander walked beside her, dressed in a sharp black suit. His expression proud and warm, together they looked unstoppable. Across the room, standing near the bar with a glass of wine in his hand, was Daniel. His suit wrinkled, his eyes tired, his posture unsure. He had not been invited, but he came anyway, hoping to see Emma one last time. His company had fallen. His money was gone. His friends had left him and Veronica. The woman he had once bragged about was long gone too. He had lost everything, and tonight, he wanted to ask for forgiveness, or at least for another chance. When he saw Emma enter, his heart twisted. He could not believe this was the same woman he had mocked, humiliated, and ignored. She looked like a queen, strong, calm, untouchable. He tried to step closer, but people surrounded her, shaking hands, congratulating her, praising her for the new charity project she and Alexander had launched to help women start their own businesses. Daniel stood at a distance, watching her glow in a world that no longer belonged to him. Emma noticed him eventually. Her eyes meeting his across the crowd. For a brief second, she felt the past rush back, the pain, the humiliation, the tears. But then she remembered who she was now, and the feeling faded. I turned back to the people around her, smiling politely. Alexander leaned toward her and asked softly, "Is everything all right?" She nodded. "Yes, everything is exactly how it should be." After a while, Daniel gathered the courage to walk up to her. He stumbled slightly, his nerves trembling as he said, "Emma, please, I need to talk to you." She turned slowly, facing him. The music faded, the people around them sensing the tension. Daniel's voice broke as he said, "I made mistakes, I hurt you, and I lost everything. I know I do not deserve anything, but please forgive me." Emma looked at him quietly, her face calm, her eyes kind but distant. She said, "Daniel, I forgave you long ago. Not for you, but for myself. I carried that pain for too long, and I decided to let it go." He looked at her, desperate. "Then maybe we can start again." He said, "Maybe we can fix this." Emma smiled softly and shook her head. "Daniel, I am not the same woman you used to. No, the one who stayed quiet while you mocked her. She is gone forever." He reached out to touch her hand, but Alexander stepped forward, his presence strong and steady, placing himself beside Emma. He looked at Daniel and said, "I think it is time for you to leave, Mr. Lewis. This is not your world anymore." Daniel's face turned pale, the weight of those words crushing him. He looked around at the crowd, at the cameras flashing at Emma and Alexander standing together, and he finally understood what he had lost. Emma turned to Alexander and said calmly, "It is all right. He is not my enemy anymore. He is just a man who does not know how to love properly." Alexander nodded and stepped back, giving her space. Daniel's voice cracked again as he whispered, "I loved you, Emma. I just did not know how to show it." Emma looked at him one last time and said quietly, "Maybe if you had respected me, you would still have me. Respect is love's first language." Daniel lowered his head, unable to answer. The photographers began to take pictures again, and the moment passed. Emma turned away gracefully, walking back toward the crowd, the lights glimmering on her silver gown. Alexander joined her again, offering his hand. She took it with a gentle smile. The music returned, filling the ballroom once more. Daniel watched as they walked together, their figures blending into the brightness while he stood alone in the shadow of his own mistakes. Later that night, as the gala ended and the guests began to leave, Emma stood by the balcony looking at the city lights below. Alexander came to stand beside her. He said quietly, "You handled that beautifully." She smiled. "Thank you. It was the last chapter I needed to close." He looked at her with admiration, saying, "You know, Emma, You have changed not into someone new but into who you were always meant to be." She turned to him, her eyes shining with warmth, and said, "Maybe I just remembered my worth." They stood there in silence for a while, the cool night air brushing against them, the world below full of noise, but up here it was peaceful. Alexander finally said, "There is something I have been meaning to ask you." Emma looked at him curious. He smiled. "Will you join me? Not just in business, but in life too." Her eyes widened, slightly. Her heart skipping a beat, she looked at him and saw not the powerful billionaire but the kind man who had once believed in her when no one else did. She smiled softly and said, "Yes." The city lights flickered like stars around them. The story of Emma Lewis ending not with revenge or bitterness but with grace and triumph. The woman who had been mocked and broken had risen higher than anyone imagined. She had turned her pain into power, her silence into strength, and her humiliation into a crown that no one could take away. And somewhere far below in the quiet streets, Daniel walked alone, thinking about the woman he had lost forever.